Hello, Chris Goodber, it's my channel, and I wanted to talk today. Hopefully, this will be just like a fairly informal video, like off the cuff as I usually do. And I wanted to talk. This is a subject I've covered in some other videos before, but on being a painter in the contemporary age, and I'm going to try and give a few bits of advice, but also perspectives. Really, I wouldn't say this is like, a video on this is how, if you want to become a painter in the fine art realm, this is how you do it. It's more like just a series of me sharing my own perspectives on that journey, having now done it since the age of 21. I'm 37 now, so I've been going for a while. I'm obviously still going to be going forward in doing it in the future because I love it, right? It provides me a form of expression. It provides me a place, my own place where I can take, with painting you're free to basically create any, it's like freedom. It's the purest form of freedom, I think, in terms of visual expression. Paint can do a lot. There's a lot you can do with paint. There's a lot to master, of course, at first, but once you break through the initial pain of like being very crap in a lot of respects, and get to at least some level of draftsmanship, which obviously people find easier or harder depending on their natural talent, I suppose, then it gives you that freedom, I suppose, to develop a style. But I'm not going to try and avoid talking too much about aesthetic values, because in many respects a lot of that's subjective. Painting is no different to a lot of other forms of visual expression or art, in that it's quite a subjective art form. Well, yes, I know. I mean, there are certainly some painters and paintings that you can look at and form an objective like that. That's amazing. Turner, for example, is a good example of a painter you can't really fail to look at his artworks and think that he was objectively an incredible draftsman. But I digress. I'll try and get into the real practical aspects. So I'll just do sort of like very much just bluntly, be realistic. I think sometimes there is this romanticized idea of being a painter that you're going to live this bohemian life, and you're going to have you're somehow going to be making enough money from your paintings to support yourself, and that's just going to go on and on and on. Now, obviously, I think most painters, when they start, a few years into the game or whatever, they do realize that is unrealistic, that you do need some sort of regular income that comes from somewhere to support your passion. Now, you can obviously make it to the point that many people do as well, where they've got gallery representation and they have that help from institutions to get their work out there, and potentially, actually, sometimes, if they're very lucky, they can make money from it. But you've got to ground yourself in reality. I think sometimes as well, obviously art is no different from any other form of there are trends of styles, there are trends, things are more popular at some points than others, certain styles, certain expressions. There's the waning of fashions, is a thing that exists in art as well, like in fine art. One thing I think I've done in my own work is I've consciously I've sold over the years. Last year I sold about 7 paintings, but I'm nowhere near the level where I could be earning the thousands of pounds you need to support yourself just from the most basic fundamental level from my work. But I've also come to accept that, because it's an unrealistic expectation, right? And there is also the flip side with in some respects this is debatable, but obviously if you start producing a work in a certain style, and you start to get quite a fair degree of success with it, then you can almost pigeonhole yourself into having to do that style again and again and again. So there is that consider, I suppose, when you're painting. I'll put some examples of some of my work up. There's a little bit there, but it's just like some sketches. But yeah, that's. I think a lot of the time, people who want to explore painting and get into it, they feel quite intimidated. Like, oh, you know, because in some respects you could say it's like you're bearing your soul or other such romantic notions. But you have to sort of like, I think in a lot of ways you have to become not immune to criticism, because it's important to take whatever criticism comes from peers on board, but you do also have to be able to develop quite a thick skin. This is, after all, a subjective world of you know, value judgments, aesthetics, and all that sort of thing. So I think you have to take on board constructive criticism, which will come from peers. You also have to seek those peers out. A good place to do this, of course, is studio groups. Find other artists that you can vibe with in a lot of respects. You can do exhibitions with, very important thing. Older artists, seek them out. That these are wise people who can teach you. And I've mentioned this before a few times. You can develop your cultural map of awareness, whether it be literature, film, philosophy, art itself as well, of course. It's only through knowing elder, more wiser artists that I've been able to learn about a lot more about philosophy, a lot more about the Renaissance, modernism, expressionism, impressionism, all the various isms of that are a part of our history as painters and visual artists. And it's important to take all those things on board, because you cannot, I mean, if your aspiration as a painter is to do something radical and new, not necessarily for the sake of it, but because you want to do something that's your own, I think you probably have to go through a state of copying and reproduction, right? I don't think you can just arrive at that novel stage that like straight away. I mean, maybe some people can, like, it's arguable, I guess, but you have to like take all these influences and try and produce something new through experimentation. Art requires experimentation. Painting's no different. You have to learn about how to handle paint. You have to learn about what exactly it is you're trying to express with your work. I mean, artist statements can be a bit of a bore, but that's obviously a part of it, depending on what sort of art you're producing or what it's based around. But yeah, it's a much, painting is a, I think you have to, this is only my view, but I think you do have to just separate the concerns of, you know, I want to do something that will, you know, because like, basically, if you got really good at if you were a really good draftsman and you, I don't know, for example, got really good at doing landscapes, that's, you could do, I don't know, like sort of impressionism, post-impressionism landscapes, and then you could probably find a bit of a market for that, and that's a completely valid thing to do. I'm not criticizing it whatsoever. That's a completely legitimate thing to do if it's your passion, you love exploring that. You know, that's subject matter, and do it in a very stylized but conventional way. That's, I think that's fine. Like, but you do have to, I do think it's important as a painter to not let get your ego or your don't let your ego get too much in the way. Basically, you always have something to learn. You always got something to experiment with. You always have to try and keep on that precipice of pushing whatever your stylistic, whatever your style is, and breaking things down, building them back up again. Form, abstraction, you know, a lot of my work definitely has gone between figuration and abstraction, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now most painters have gone through this in some way. Like, most painters have, even if you think of like well-known abstract painters like Mark Rothko, for example. He started off as a expressionist, a figurative expressionist, right? And then he's went to the biomorphism, breaking down a form, until finally going to his minimalistic form that he was known for, the colour field paintings and such. And then if you look at a lot of artists' history, Picasso's another good example, back and forth between figuration and abstraction, and a constant back and forth between those two modes of representation. That's something you get more used to as you learn more and you experiment more, but a lot of it's like making mistakes. And I think often where people get caught is they do, I don't know, 5 paintings, but they're not satisfied with what they're doing. But it takes a long time. A lot of painting is material. It's dealing with materials. It's experimenting with materials and media. You have to learn about canvases, stretching canvases, paints, densities, different mediums you can use with paint. You know, you're going to work with acrylic, you're going to work with oil, you're going to work with ink, watercolors. These all have different consistencies, and it takes time to learn them. It's very material. It's very physical often as well with painting. This is something that's often a bit misunderstood. Like, if you're not a painter, you don't realise how physical the work is. Not to mention the fact that you have to get studio provision, which is getting increasingly more difficult these days, or you have to find a space where you can just make a mess, which I think is very important as well. And you know, it's getting harder these days. Anyway, I'll just try and break this down into some more concrete advice, so I'm not just yabbering on too much. Don't expect to make money in the first 5 years at least. If you sell, that's good, but don't over rely on that. Get a decent job that will provide you some regular income and is still going to be maybe in the same area, right? Because like I work for a university, for example, that's tied in with the arts, but if I didn't have that regular income, then I couldn't really support myself, right? I've had a pretty difficult year in that regard beforehand, before getting it, so that's something always to bear in mind. You want to surround yourself with people who know more than you, elder artists, not necessarily elder, but more experienced artists maybe. Like for my case, for example, I'm self-taught, but I have almost had a university education from being in various studios for years and years and years, having lots of interesting conversations with people who have been through academia or who have that encyclopedic knowledge of art, philosophy and history and literature and everything else. Have as many interesting conversations as you can. Always take on board criticism, even if it's very negative. I mean, if it's negative without thought, then you can maybe brush that off a bit. But if someone gives you especially if they're not a painter and they're giving you a thought or a suggestion, ponder it, see if it has any validity, and take it on board. Because that's you cannot. Like I say, the worst thing you can do is get too overly egotistically arrogant. That's the death, I think, in a lot of respects, of moving forward with your painting practice. Look in your local area, obviously, for studios. If there is, it's often easier in cities, but you can also think outside of the box with that. Like in the area that I grew up in, there was no studio provision really, so we found an old building, a bunch of us, and did it ourselves. There's something to be said for that entire punk rock DIY art culture ethos. It's probably even more useful these days. It come with its own complications. It's not always easy, but it's worth doing. You can do it. Read a lot. You need to deepen your level of knowledge. Art is, after all, especially painting as well, you are a person who's having a conversation with eternity, if you want to put it poetically, I guess. That is what the job of a painter is in some respects. Billy Childish put it well, I think, when he said you're basically taking the work of someone who died a long time ago, who had similar obsessions, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you're taking similar, someone had a similar obsession with certain imagery, and you're carrying on with their mission. Don't be too intimidated by being a bit rubbish. Everybody who paints is a bit rubbish at first. Don't feel too. I still struggle a bit sometimes, a lot of the time actually, with proportions. Is still something I struggle with sometimes, on occasion. And I've got a lot better at dealing with that problem. I know the ways that with paint, that I can work through and sculpt the paint to do what I want it to do. But proportion, measurement, all that sort of thing, which you get from learning something like anatomy, is of course a useful thing to learn about. Perspective, colour, how colour theory works, all that stuff. That's all the technical side of things. And do it. Don't really do it, like I say, with any expectations. Look, I've been doing this for several years. I've had tons of group exhibitions, I've had solo exhibitions in London. I'm not even in a position where I can make a living from it. Storage becomes more harder as you go on. Like especially if you have larger scale work, then it can really become an issue. I found that a bit myself. Like I have sold, but most of what I've sold has been medium-sized work and smaller work. I have like a series of paintings just in front of me here, which are actually quite large, almost like they're a bit like stained glass. They're not that size, but they are similar format in terms of on canvas, and it becomes very difficult to store them at a certain point. So that's always a concern, but it's a difficult one, that, because like you naturally as a painter you do want to scale up a bit. You want to get more ambitious with scale, or change the scale, or mix it up a bit. But in terms of that, it depends. Obviously, if you scale them up and you're not like at the level of having a gallery representation and you know, the ability to sell to like collections and private collectors, that might become an issue. But do it anyway if you feel like it. But just bear in mind that you're going to have to find some sort of storage solution along the way. Like I've actually got the problem now where I've got piles of paintings which are quite large. I've got some here, I've got some scattered all around. So it's like that can become an issue, and it's just worthwhile being aware of that, I suppose. I don't want this to be too like of a negative video. I'm just telling you the realistically how it is, really. Most artists don't, you know, the average salary for an artist is like 12k a year. It's not enough to live off unless you want to live in abject poverty. Like I say, it's worth just broaden all your horizons. Go to galleries a lot, of course. Go to permanent collections. Go to shows. You know, if you want to like try and ingratiate yourself in scenes, that's always worth doing. Like I did that a bit myself. Like I got to know artists in London. Took a bit of time. Took a bit of time to get to know people, but I definitely benefited from that. And I also learned and I evolved, and I was able to have meet a lot of interesting people, have a lot of interesting times, right? Times I look back on with a lot of nostalgia in a lot of ways. You know, I spent time in London, in the London art scene. I got a bit involved in theory. I learned more about, you know, things like situationism, about different philosophical movements in art as well. All this stuff. You have to broaden everything and just, yeah, just get involved in all those discussions. Because if you're not involved in them, someone else is getting involved in them and having those discussions, right? And it's a good thing to have strong opinions on them as well. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I think I'll probably do. I just wanted to like do a short video, which is not too short now, unfortunately. But yeah, just talking about, as a painter, what should you be thinking about when you're getting into it? What do you need to really soak up? And yeah, just a bit of my own perspectives on it, really. I hope that's been useful in any way, shape or form. I hope that gives you some insight if you're a painter who's practicing. If you're already a practicing painter, what are your own perspectives? I think I'll leave it there. Alright, in a bit.